Hello and welcome back to the High Five series. This is Michael Long from the Kaplan staff CFP faculty. I want to welcome you to High Five, and this is a special session of High Five in that it's going to be exclusively dedicated to the CFP board's standards of professional conduct, and this is just so very important for the national exam. There's some pretty good summary information on some of the key areas of the standards in Book 1, and technically this is part of Book 1, but there's just so much going on with the standards in the exam in recent cycles that I wanted to devote an entire session to the standards, mostly to point you in the right direction. I'm going to highlight some things that are great test material and have been known to be in the question pool for the national exam, but my main hope is that coming away from this session, you'll start to take the standards very seriously and read them on an ongoing basis. You can see I've typed here in the middle of this page, have you read the standards of professional conduct at least once this week? And I'm actually serious about that. If I were studying for the CFP exam, I would make it part of each and every week to read through the booklet on the standards. It impacts the exam that much. Some questions that will just come straight out of the standards as it's written, and I'll help you identify some of those things in this session. But also the standards help with the numerous questions that you'll have on the exam about what does the planner do next, things that look at the steps in the financial planning process. One of the sections of the standards are the practice standards, and they are in alignment with the steps of the financial planning process. And to study how CFP board defines what's happening in each of the steps is very, very important, because some of that we could just take for granted. Yeah, I know the steps of the process, no problem. But when you start to dig into it, you see as they define it, there are many, many different things expected in each step of the process, and those practice standards are really, really helpful to kind of view all of this through the board's lens from a testing applications standpoint. And with all of the High Five sessions, the goal really is to get you across that bridge from moving you from an academic understanding of the CFP topics and practices to pure application. You know, how would that work in a financial planning scenario? So in each of the sessions, that's what I hope to help you focus on, are those application pieces. Now, I'm going to work out of the CFP board material. They have a full color brochure or booklet. I think it's about 40 pages that you can download from their website and print out. I'm not a big fan of their full color brochure, though. I find it very difficult to read. There's a lot of colors going on. There's some small fonts going on. But I'm going to show you a way you can get a cleaner copy of this as well. But there will be exam questions from each of the sections listed here in the table of contents. Starting out, the first thing we're going to look at is just terminology, definitions that are in the booklet, and the kind of questions that can come from there. Then we'll roll down through the other sections, the code of ethics, the rules of conduct, the practice standards that I've already mentioned, disciplinary rules and procedures, and appeal rules and procedures. Unfortunately, that's the biggest part of their booklet, but it seems they are starting to have more exam questions that are sourcing from Section 5 and 6. So I want to make sure we have some content in there today for this session. As always, if you have questions as I move through the material, you can submit them either directly to me, michael.long@kaplan.com, or through your instructor link service, Ask an Instructor folder. You can submit them, and all I ask there is that you put High Five in the subject of the email, and that way they know to route it directly to me because it's related to the webinar series. But let me show you some highlights in here, and And again, just take this very seriously because there's a lot of questions that this material will help you get correct for your national exam. All right, so I mentioned I don't really like their color brochure, but if you go to the website cfp.net and then click into for CFP professionals, you can see the link on the page here, and then professional standards enforcement, standards of professional conduct. You will land on this page, and you can see here where I have the arrows. That's the breakdown of the booklet, starting with terminology and then clear out till appeal rules and procedures. If you click into each section individually, you can then print just a regular PDF copy of that material, and it's so much easier on your eyes. It has larger fonts. It's just better to study off of than the full color brochure. So that's an easy fix on that piece of it. If you get stuck on this, just give me a shout and I can help you get it. But this is an example of what you can get when you click in individually to the sections before you would print them. Very easy to read stuff. So starting out, just in the terminology section, the first section of the book, there are some highly, almost always testable things right out of the terminology. And one has to do with commissions and whether a planner can hold themselves out as a fee-only planner. Well, a lot of that relates to whether there's any source of commission going on. And this definition can be a little bit different than what you and I might have recited just on our own. But in the CFP terminology I've highlighted here, this includes 12B1 fees, trailing commissions, surrender charges, and contingent deferred sales charges. Each of those is considered by the board a form of commission. And if this is part of one's compensation line, they cannot hold themselves out as a fee-only planner. They would be fee plus commission. So compensation then gets further defined as any non-trivial economic benefit, whether monetary or non-monetary. So this can get into the whole realm of prizes and awards and such that we might automatically look at as a form of compensation, but they would. And a pretty strict definition of fee only may hold out practices fee only if and only if all of the certificate's compensation from all of his or her client work comes exclusively from the clients in the form of fixed, flat, hourly, percentage, or performance-based fees. So it's a pretty restrictive definition. I suspect you will see one or more questions on the exam related to fee only or fee plus commission. And I've thought about this. How would I answer these questions? If I couldn't decide whether this would be a fee only or a fee plus commission, I'm probably going to default with fee plus commission just because it's so restrictive as to how one could hold out as a fee only planner. But this comes just straight up on the first page of the terminology, one or more questions related to that. Another big section right up front here is personal, the definition of personal financial planning. I think you'll have some questions related to, is this a financial planning engagement? So you have to have a process to think that through. So there's 4 things that you can work on remembering. Maybe these are flashcard notes or something. But when you're asked that kind of question, we're looking at what was the client's understanding and intent. In the narrative description that you're given in the question or the case study facts, was it their intent to have a financial planning relationship with the planner being described? The second area is the degree to which multiple subject areas are involved. This is not a requirement. There can be a financial planning engagement in only one area. But as you read the narrative, the more areas the planner is engaging the client on, the more likely you've got a financial planning engagement. Going hand in hand with that is the comprehensiveness of data gathering. What are they telling us in the question has been gathered by the volume of information within a singular area or information from multiple areas, and that will then lead to the breadth and depth of recommendations. What are we doing here for the client? So that's just a quick list when you're being asked to decide whether there's a financial planning engagement. Now, this is important because when it is determined that a financial planning engagement exists or the material elements of financial planning are being provided, what that really impacts for the exam are the number of items that must be disclosed in writing. So a lot of things that maybe could have been verbal, once it's determined there's a financial plan engagement, now we have a whole bunch of things that have to be in writing. Here again, how would I answer it if I can't decide? I would probably err on the side of, yeah, we're probably doing some financial planning here and I need to make some written disclosures. And all of this is in this material. So you can start digging that out and have a process of taking notes so you can remember more and more of it. All right, so the next section after the terminology is the Code of Ethics and Professional Responsibility. One good standalone question I've highlighted here in the yellow greenish color in that first paragraph. The principles are aspirational in character and provide a source of guidance for CFP certificates and registrants. So they're not the basis of law. They're not the basis of going to jail, perhaps. They're aspirational in nature, and that has been a standalone question, particularly that word aspirational. Now, there are 7 guiding principles in the Code of Ethics, and these again are pretty intuitive, and you could describe what that means, I'm sure, pretty much off the top of your head. But give this a read. Get comfortable with what these 7 areas are. I doubt that you would have more than maybe one question on this, and it could go one of 2 ways. It might be one of those, all of the following are considered principles in the Code of Ethics, except, and you've got one of them that doesn't fit. The other way this has been tested in the past is just by description, and I have the red box to note there. They might just describe what the planner is doing or demonstrating, and we need to link up then, well, what is this illustrating? Maybe it's a description of the planner working through multiple alternatives, even with different products, to meet the client's goals without exclusively recommending just one thing. They've got some objectivity in the selection process for their recommendations. So be ready either way, just to list them or to understand and recognize by description. And I think I had, yeah, the way I've always remembered these is just with the quick acronym FDIC COP, and that you're never going to have to recite these in order 1 through 7. So the FDIC COP is not in order, but you've got a letter for each of the 7 principles. I'm real big on that kind of thing. If there's any list of things that you could form some kind of word out of, I think that helps. And it may help you spot the one that's not part of the list. Here's where that fee only or fee plus commission comes in. Under the rules of conduct, the certificate, this is early on as well. This is part of the early steps in the process. There has to be an accurate and understandable description of compensation arrangements. And in a financial planning engagement, that's the kind of thing that has to be in writing. Now, Form ADV covers some of this, but what you would want to do is make sure you have revisited that form, and maybe you do this on a regular basis as well, just so you could spot something that's not regularly listed on Form ADV, particularly Part 2, so that you could easily pick out a piece that would need to be additionally disclosed because it wasn't covered automatically on Form ADV. So in the financial planning engagement, or if material elements of financial planning are being delivered, then we've got these series of things in writing. Conflicts of interest is another big deal to CFP board, and that has to happen before recommendations are made. All this happens way up in front. And then you might have a question or two just on Form ADV. And a couple of those questions have been particularly, could it be done electronically? And the answer to that is yes. And then would there be things, can it be used to satisfy some of the disclosures? And that is absolutely yes, it can be as well. All right, and you can see these rules then go from 1 point to down into the 6s, again, kind of tracking with some of the steps in the process. Another big item to the board is confidentiality, and there typically is one or more questions to determine whether there's a problem with confidentiality in the story that's being told. So you have some pretty important definitions here, and then some exceptions. I mean, the basic rule is yes, it's all confidential. It doesn't matter in what format it's been collected. It's confidential. And then you have some exceptions there as necessitated by fulfilling the obligations, as required to defend against charges of wrongdoing in connection with a civil dispute, or as to perform the services that have been asked to do. So a short list of when it's okay to share information. Otherwise, the default answer is, don't do that. And that, again, is pretty intuitive as well. There often has been a question centered on Rule 3.6 and 3.7. Again, pretty intuitive, but a certificate shall not borrow money from a client. Couple of exceptions. The client is a member of the CFP's immediate family, or the client is an institution in the business of lending money. And this, by the same token, a certificate shall not lend money to a client, again with the same two exceptions. Another question that's in the pool relates to commingling. Another intuitive response, don't do it. But more importantly, for exam purposes, when could it be done? And then so in this 3.8, Rule 3.8, you can see unless the commingling is permitted by law or is explicitly authorized and defined in a written agreement between the parties. So there is a way to do it, and that you want to remember that, because that's a good testing piece. Instinctively, we would always say don't do it. So 3.9 again touches on more commingling and that it can be done. And note there in the last sentence, there has to be sufficient record keeping to track assets separately if there's going to be commingling going on. There can be some questions about how many days that you have to inform the CFP board of certain things. So the first one that shows up sometimes on the exam is just changes to contact information, 45 days. That's a flashcard note for me, 45 days. And then a more serious one is that the CFP has to notify the board in writing of any conviction of a crime except misdemeanor traffic offenses, or if the offense involves use of alcohol or drugs. That has to be reported to the board within 30 days. That's been another exam question. So be ready for that. And there sometimes is a question related to DUI. And that question could be that there's been a charge, but it hasn't been convicted, and that would change the answer, because this specifically shows conviction of a crime. So this one, I would imagine you're going to get both of these, the contact information at 45 and the convictions at 30 days. Also mixed into this one sometimes you see in their professional suspension of a license or registration for wrongdoing. But you want to read that one carefully because it may go on to read that the reason the license was suspended was for administrative purposes. It just wasn't renewed on time or something. So you're looking for wrongdoing rather than just letting a license lapse there. All right, that's a good page of test questions right there. Quite a few things that you'll either see all of them or several of them. Now, one of the things you want to keep straight as you look at this material, 3 different references. And it can get a little fuzzy as you're reading through this material and say, wait a minute, what's the difference between STEP in the financial planning process and the CFP board domain? They're all interrelated, just different terms. So this page just shows the association. The first step in the financial planning process is establishing and defining the client-planner relationship. Exact same title in CFP boards, domains. I talked a little bit about domains in one of the other sessions for book 1. And then within the standards, there are these practice standards, and they're numbered from the 100 series through the 600 series, but that is in alignment with step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so forth. So you can always make the connection of where we're at in the process by understanding that relationship. To remember the steps, because occasionally there's a question about which of these is officially one of the steps that they recognize. So again, using an acronym with the first letters from establishing the relationship to monitoring the recommendations once implemented, EGADIM. I've always pronounced that EGADIM, and maybe some of your other instructors have as well. But again, it's a very easy thing to write out a few times and remember it always then in case you would get that simple of a question of, which of these are part of the process. Now, you look at this stuff and it can kind of be, yeah, so much of that's common sense. And I think that's true. And you'll find that you're drawing on some personal experience the more years that you've been in the business advising clients. But you also want to be sensitive to the fact of all of the different things CFP board says happens in each of these steps. So this first list is the first step in the process, domain number 1 with CFP board. But if you flip down through those letters, there's a lot going on there. Identifying the client. The planner needs to know the client. What are their needs and expectation? Explain the scope of the services. Conflicts of interest, as I've mentioned. Scope of the engagement. What all is the planner going to be doing for the client? And then disclosures of compensation. That's a lot of stuff. So the more of these you can absorb, and I think that's just a matter of time. The more time you can spend in the information, you'll remember more of that alphabet of things. So that way, if you get the question, what should the planner do next? You're centering on, okay, where am I at in the process and have all the things I remember are expected in the first step. Has it been done, or is there something missing? If it's that kind of question, I think it will be fairly obvious of what hasn't happened. For instance, there haven't been compensation disclosures made. There haven't been potential conflicts of interest disclosed. It'll be some of those more notable things, but still, you run down through that complete list. Some more information then, linking the step in the process to domain 1 to the practice standards, which is 100-1, defining the scope of the engagement. So there's the parallel. And the point here is what's been highlighted and boxed out in the red notes. You'll see over and over and over in the CFP board material prior to providing any service, these pieces must be done. And that's where one of those what do you do next questions could not be your exact instinct. You're ready to move on and implement something that the client is interested in. But if we haven't done all these disclosures, then that's going to need to happen. So just be aware when you see a question that ends with what should the planner do next, immediately what I hope that triggers is, okay, this is a question about the financial planning process. It's not a topical question with academic information, let's say, or rules and definitions focused on the product or strategy, but rather it's about where we at in the process and have I done the things they said I need to do. And then here from their information, it's about the fee only or fee plus commission. Again, just try to burn this one in. And I think the part that not everyone always thinks of is in their eyes would be considered a form of compensation, and that would be those last two things, surrender charges and contingent deferred sales charges. If that type of product is involved, then we are in a commission setting as far as CFP board. One of the answers that sometimes pops up on those questions, I've noted there in the box, salary only is no longer an option. It used to be. It was another category in addition to these three you see now, but no longer. So just know to strike salary off if you happen to land on that question on your exam. Talked about those definitions of compensation and commission and fee only, very restrictive definition. Conflicts of interest. Now this one's interesting because you may be told a scenario and there have been disclosures in the early steps of the process, but now in the story the client is having the planner move into a new area of work in the engagement. And perhaps in the story it surfaces that there could be a conflict of interest in this particular area. And maybe an example would be you've done a lot of financial planning work with the client and they're wanting to buy a home and are turning to you for a recommendation on a really good realtor. And maybe there is some referral fee involved with that realtor you've had for an ongoing basis, or maybe it's a relative or something. That's a potential conflict of interest, and we need to loop back around and disclose that potential conflict of interest. So don't ever forget about the fact that even though you're deep into the relationship, there may be something that causes you to circle back around and do some of the initial steps in the relationship again. But I'm hoping just by kind of dwelling on this in this kind of session that you can just develop an instinct when you see anything pertaining to the process, that's just going to be a red light for you, and you can be thinking of these steps in the process. The individual content is not that difficult. It's just where are we at? Talked about how to process that yes or no question, and I really think you'll have this when are we doing financial planning? Do we have a financial planning engagement? And there are the four things to think about. So how I remember those, just a couple of, again, letter combinations, IC Bud or Cub ID. Using just letters from these four different pieces, and if I could remember one of those two, mine has always been Cub ID. Then I can sort that out. I can land on the understanding and intent, the degree of multiple subject areas involved, comprehensiveness of data, breadth and depth of recommendations. So when I run into that question, I was like, okay, Cub ID, do we have those things going on? Yep, well, we've got ourselves a financial planning engagement and we need to do the written disclosures and such. This is a helpful page that they put out of some things that are likely to be considered material elements, but maybe more importantly on this page are some things they would not consider to be material elements of financial planning. I think the material things are easier to spot Certainly conducting very detailed data gathering across multiple areas, that's pretty easy. Recommendations across multiple areas. Providing investment advisory services is defined by the applicable regulators. You could spot those easily, but then I like the list to remember. These would be flashcard notes for me. These would not be, in and of themselves, independently, would not be considered material element of financial planning. Just opening an account, just completing an application, even for an insurance product or something. Just basically get to know you type of fact-finding, real general stuff. The third one I like, and that one's just showing up before in a question, where the only thing happening is solely providing brokerage and or insurance products or services. That by itself would not be considered a material element. Another one that's showing up are the last two things: completing tax returns without providing any other financial services. That would not rise to the level of material elements of financial planning. Same goes with, there's a question in the pool about teaching a class, a financial class, maybe at community college, and then folks are visiting afterward. Is that considered giving material elements of financial planning? No. So I like it that there's lots of combinations in there, but there's, 7 or 8 things that you could get to a point where you remember every single one of them and can apply that for that particular question. And I try to come up with something here as usual to remember that short list of things, and using the letters, I came back with cat foes. So maybe you can rearrange those letters and come up with something meaningful for you, but that could be something that sticks as well, making that question an easy one as well. Domain 2, and you'll get the feel here, so I won't belabor it in this session, but just the importance of studying within the domains. Here we're in the second domain, gathering of the information. If anything would be intuitive, I would think that, wouldn't you? Yeah, we're going to gather the information for the engagement, but there are specific things in here that we need to check off on. Has there been a time horizon established for each goal? Have we established any kind of risk tolerance with the client, or risk exposures with the client, and what kind of information might we need for that? So a little more detail than just instinctively how we might react when you're asked about, well, what's gathering information necessary to fulfill the engagement? What's that step about? So once more, you pour over this multiple times and you start to be able to remember more lines. I like this bottom piece too, and this sometimes is the correct answer, that to really move forward, we need more information, and we must be able to recognize the need for additional information. So that would always get my attention. If that was one of the 4 answer choices, that would cause me to pause and say, why are you telling me that? Why are you offering me that one? Very well can be that I really am not in a position to move forward without gathering some additional information. Here again, and as you start to read this stuff, you'll see prior to making recommendations, we have to gather the proper information. It's always prior to. So hopefully that will burn in. Also here in that boxed out area, the obligation to point out unrealistic goals and objectives. So you might see a story along those lines where it's just, where it's like, wow, where's the client coming from with these expectations? They're never going to be able to get there with their discretionary income available. So that can be a correct answer too, that it needs to be pointed out that this particular goal should be revisited and refined because it's not attainable, based on the information that's being given so far. The green part there about both quantitative information, you'll see a section in book 1 about qualitative, quality of life type information. But this is all centered on being sure to collect the proper amount of information to do what the engagement is about. Here's a really important one, and this one is one of those that you hear about a lot, and that is, what if they won't cooperate? What if the client won't give you the information that you really need? And you probably all have met someone like that. They want you to recommend something or do something, but they're not going to tell you much about themselves. So that's a popular question on the exam. So the answer choices here can be: restrict the scope of the engagement to the matters for which sufficient and relevant information has been obtained. So initially in the story, there might have been a long list of things that they want the planner's help with. But further on in the story, they're just not going to share much information. So we have to back off and restrict the scope. And if they're super uncooperative, one of the options will be terminate the agreement. Now, you may have an exam day where you get several of these, and just be real careful in evaluating those. And I say that because I had a student a while back that had multiple questions of this nature, and he said to me, you know what, for every one of those, I put terminate the relationship, terminate the engagement, because that's what we would do in my firm. We don't put up with that. And that's fine, but I doubt seriously that that was the correct answer for each of those that he saw. My guess is one or more of them were to restrict the scope of the engagement. So be a little careful there. It's sometimes hard to unhitch from what actually might happen in your own firm. So try to process the information on what CFP board is describing. All right, then moving on, and again, this is probably what you're best at already. This is more old school testing, and that is domain 3, step 3. You're evaluating. You've gathered the information. It's been set forth what it is they want help with, and you have some information now. What do you do next? Well, you start the whole evaluation process based on the areas in which they're engaging you. And this, a lot of you have been doing this for many years, and your instincts will carry you through this step in the process. Same with the next one up, the fourth, actually making the recommendations. I've boxed here on this page special circumstances. You will probably have several questions regarding special circumstances. The most likely would be divorce, and that can touch on numerous different areas through all 6 books if you really think about it. But what happens in divorce with, say, retirement assets? How is alimony treated? What about child support coming out of book 4 for income taxes? So the other one can be like special needs children. That can show up in some questions as well. So just have that on your radar. And then I've red boxed another. Don't forget about the fact that it's possible, based on the scenario, that the correct answer could be stay the course, remain with the existing plan. So don't ever assume that big changes need to be made in the recommendations. And this is another one of those, if offered as an answer choice, continue on with existing plan, that would really get my attention. Why are they giving me that one? And maybe on one of the kind of questions you'll have, that'll be the correct answers. And then in green at the bottom of this page, and this speaks to that circling back around. Don't forget about that as a potential correct answer, that the client's moving you into a new area of work. There are additional things being put on the table, deepening the engagement. You may need to go back and amend the scope of the engagement. It may have been fairly restrictive in the beginning of the relationship, but time has gone on. You're helping with more areas. Don't forget to go back and amend the scope of the engagement, circling back around to the early steps. And here's what I was talking about with the developing recommendations. Again, most of this is how you spend your days today with your clients. You're evaluating information, recommending new strategies or products to meet their goals. So this one, again, will be fairly intuitive for you of how you analyze the situation. Remember, one of the 4 answer choices is correct. It's not the 5th one you might have in your head. And I say that simply because from time to time questions will come in to the instructor link service or to me directly, and the student is saying, why wouldn't it have been this? But what they're describing wasn't one of the 4 answer choices. And you have to reel it back in and say, one of these 4 is the correct answer, even though I have a little different take on it. One of the correct answer is going to be one of those 4. So don't let yourself do that. And if you find yourself doing that just when practicing, it's likely you may do it on the national exam too and just think, well, none of those are good. So just stay focused on the task at hand and do the best you can with the 4 offered. Another piece that shows up in the questions is what they call holistic and integrated financial planning. And this is just incorporating the steps within, with the various recommendations, but it's also touching on will action in one area of the plan impact any other areas of the plan? And you have to take that into consideration in picking one of those 4 answer choices. I think the green highlight is important here, that it's possible that planners would have a different recommendation. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's possible that the recommendation will come down to a single alternative, multiple ones from which to select, or none at all. So any one of those pieces will become part of a correct answer, again, based on the scenario. What's the goal or the objective? Am I tuned into that? And then I can start sorting my answer choices. Once again here is just reference to the fact that it might amend the scope of the engagement. Because of the competency piece, if the new work gets the planner into an area for which they're not competent, then that needs to be discussed, and what the plan would be. Would we bring in other planners? Would we consult with other professionals? And if that's the case, if that hasn't already been part of the engagement, then that may need to be amended and put in there. Also, mutually defining. I don't have a highlight on this, but if you look up to the section just before this last red box and green highlight, mutually defining all these things. And that makes sense, yeah. But you could see a question where it really is just the planner going to do this, going to do that at this time, or what have you. If you sense a one lane approach to it, then we want to back off and reevaluate that one, because all of these steps you'll see mutually determine, mutually decide. So you just want to have that on your radar. Are they describing something here that has been mutually agreed upon, or am I seeing a one lane, either totally from the most likely candidate would be that the planner is just dictating all these things. Just let that be an alert. Mentioned it a couple times about this alignment of get in the groove, as I said. If you start to feel like, wow, this question is so subjective, that is a really good time to revisit what's been stated as far as the client's goals and needs and priorities, that old RTFQ. All right, moving on with this, the 5th domain, the 4th step, but then CFP board puts domains 4 and 5 really as part of the developing and communicating the recommendations. I've red boxed here, get feedback. That would be an easy part to maybe skip, right? But if you are being asked, what do you do next? And it triggers this, okay, where are we at? And you determine we're in communicating the recommendations. Well, those two highlighted in green, those are real important answer choices in that piece. Obtain feedback from the client, and then also verify client acceptance. Those two have a tendency to show up in a question related to communicating the recommendations. All right. Once again, more reference here to as the contextual variables change. If you've already listened to the book 1 high five session, early on in that I talked about contextual variables is one of the things that can go into the makeup of a question. So as the client moves along that line of the contextual variables I call really demographics, as they move from being a young single person to perhaps being married or getting out to retirement, sometimes the scope of the engagement changes. And once again, we would want to keep that up to date. And as I mentioned previously in the red box there, sometimes changes to the scope of the engagement reveal conflicts of interest that have not been there previously, and those would need to be noted as well. So just the whole message here in pointing out these consistencies is don't be afraid to loop back around to the front and do some of the things that you did early on in the relationship when change is happening in the services that you're providing. Implementing, you know, they've said yes, they've given you the feedback, we're moving on. Couple of things that have shown up in questions in implementing. One is defining them responsibilities with implementation, but also monitoring comes into play as well. Who's going to do what? Implementation, part of the text you'll read from the board is about timelines. Is there a timeline laid out for implementation? So it's just always very thorough, kind of methodical, and we're not going from hi, how are you to implementation. Always be thinking deliberately as far as what step are we in and what do I remember reading about that were part of this step. So under domain 6, assigning responsibilities, that's a big deal in some of these questions. Who's going to do what? And there have been at least one question where this was under dispute. Whose fault was this? And it tied back to were there assigned responsibilities? Once again, with all of these changes, we may have new conflicts, we may have new compensation disclosures to point out. So you're probably getting the message very well at this point. We're always cognizant of where we're at in the relationship and what step, and that's the process of taking apart the questions is to determine that. And under monitoring, I mean, that kind of goes hand in hand with the implementation, but here again, I've highlighted mutually defining the monitoring responsibilities. And that process may cause us to reinitiate steps of that process and modify the engagement. So that's a theme that's played through all 6 steps so far, that we may need to make some amendments. And then the domain 8, the 8th piece as the board defines it, is really practicing within the standards of professional conduct, the entire booklet. And that threads its way through all of the steps and all of the products and strategies that might be recommended or evaluated. So that's what this whole brochure in this session was about. Okay, a couple of tools here to finish out this session. This is a really good piece that CFP board did, in the last, I don't know, 6 months or so. And I like how this condenses the steps of the financial planning process and the practice standards that are affiliated with each of the steps, and it just boils it down. And I think this is just great note-taking right here. What's the professional required to do? How do they do it? It couldn't get any better than that from a memorization standpoint or a recall standpoint. And then I like the last column on the right too. It's just got tips and what rules pertain to this particular step in the process. And those indicated in blue, when you download this form, you can actually click it. Those are live links. So you could click into any of these blue color pieces and get more information about this particular step and practice standard. I think this is just an outstanding study piece to boil all that stuff down into an easy to read chart. And then you might want to check out some of these links that are in there as well. They have some webinars. If we just look at the 100 series across to the right there are webinars you could listen to on defining the scope of the engagement, managing conflicts of interest, compensation disclosures. Those webinars are dry, like all of this content is dry, but it can give you insight to the board's thinking of these areas. And then even the tip, you know, like I've been saying, if you're not sure, then put it in writing. When in doubt, write it out. So I really like this piece, and I've just started adding it to High Five. So I'd like for you to download that and just have that present when you're answering these kind of questions. But it moves, you know, clear through all 6 steps of the process and the rules that apply. It's just really good. So hopefully you'll spend a lot of time with that. I mean, I would read the full standards once a week, but I would now add this. I would be reading this practice standards list at least once a week, and with the hope of maybe making those questions very easy because you've spent so much time on these steps. Now, not so much fun, and this didn't used to be part of High Five until the last year, let's say, the disciplinary rules and procedures. It seems they're starting to pull more and more exam questions out of this section of the material. It is the longest section in the booklet, but in the past, there were only a couple of questions, it seems, sourced from here, but I'm hearing differently now. So make sure you spend some time back here in the back of that material and study the disciplinary actions. Now, used to be, and this would still be in the pool for sure, but one of the always seen kind of questions was just, what are the 4 forms of discipline if a CFP finds itself sideways with the board? You know, what's possible here? And it ranges from just private censure, you know, which is an unpublished piece, clear out to permanent revocation. And a secondary part to that question was, if CFP board revokes the use of the marks, it's permanent. There's no way to get them back. That has been an exam question as well. So certainly continue to know these 4, but also start to spend a little more time with the other areas that are in the back of this material for discipline. This was also mentioned in the rules, but you'll see them also back here in the articles of discipline in Article 13. This whole section has it. But conviction of a crime other than minor traffic offenses and being subject to professional discipline, that was 30 days. Hopefully they've cleared it all up, but when the standards first came out, rule, I think it was 6.4, had shown that to be 10 days, but they have changed and administer that particular rule in this section at 30 days. So don't be thrown if you see reference to this at 10 days. It's just somewhere they haven't caught up and edited that yet, but it is indeed 30 days the correct answer. Then another area back here are candidate fitness standards, and there are, again, pretty intuitive stuff. Conduct that will always bar an individual from becoming CFP certified. This is some pretty serious stuff. So, you know, any kind of felony conviction that we see is going to be an automatic. And then here I also highlighted, unless a revocation of a financial professional license, unless it's administrative in nature. So there again, RTFQ, and make sure you see the nature of the license being revoked, because it might have just been administrative. 2 or more personal bankruptcies are part of this. And that's deemed to be a presumptive bar. It doesn't mean automatic, but most likely it is, as would be a suspension of a license, and then some more felony convictions. Hopefully your instincts will carry you with this line of questioning. I think there's probably at least 2 or 3 questions in the pool that relate to the fitness standards. This is another new piece. It's not as easy to look at or remember as that practice standards, but I want you to spend some time with this over the weeks and just try to get a feel for the flow. What happens when CFP board decides there's going to be an investigation? How does it flow? Where does it go from step to step? Maybe along the way, trying to remember some of these days in which to answer and respond. I mean, most of it tends to be 30 to 45 days. So that would be my instinct. If I wasn't certain, I'd pick one of those 2 on a question. But here again, it just seems like there's, you know, at least 1 or 2 questions that have to do with the process, the investigative process. So see how much of this you could absorb, but it's going to take some time to work at it. And I think what my goal here would be is, could I just sketch out, on a pad of paper, could I sketch out kind of the steps that happen here, and just hope that that's enough to cover that particular question. But this is a new reference piece that they put out. It's been in place since 2013, but this piece has not been out there for us to look at like this, in this manner. This one's probably even easier to remember than, because it's a little more linear, what happens and then what happens and then what happens. So I just want this to be on your radar. You're not going to ever remember every single one of these boxes, but if you could just feel comfortable with the big picture process of when someone gets sideways with the board and an investigation starts, what happens, and then what happens if the CFP wants to appeal, you know, whatever judgment was handed down from the board. How's that work? This is a good piece also that's worth you know, downloading and printing out, and it's just a checklist, compliance checklist that's to be used in practice. It's really a field piece. I look at it as a source of potential exam questions as you get into these steps. What's CFP board telling me about it? So I like the summary effect of this. In the first step, defining the scope of the engagement, I could probably remember those 3 things. Have I documented the understanding and intent? Have we looked at the scope of the engagement and the breadth of services to be offered? And have we documented how much data needs to be gathered? You know, maybe that's all I remember about that first step, but I like my chances if I can remember the short list of checkoff things. So this is something I think that's worth printing out and doing some highlighting on and note taking, just to try to remember, you know, 1, 2, 3 things for each of the steps in the process. All right. Now, there's some pretty good resources on CFP website. I mentioned a few of the recorded webinars, and they're available for playback. You can get to them through that URL that I have in blue for you. If you can work these into your normal study pattern, I think it's worth it. You know, if you could just pick up 1, 2, 3 more correct answers, that sometimes can make the difference. So these are available for you. And then I also highlighted here, they have some pretty good frequently asked question documents under exam resources. And here again, I've got the URL for you. But that's a good read. I would absolutely look at those frequently asked questions because it goes through all those same pieces that I've been outlining for you today. But I think it's a well done piece that I believe there would be numerous correct answer choices that could be learned through those FAQ documents. All right, that's a lot of stuff. I appreciate your patience today. It's not the most exciting content, but this is just so important for the national exam. I hope you take me up on it and follow the advice of reading the standards at least once a week, adding in these newer documents that they have, that practice standards, summary list, and the appeals process, disciplinary process. Add those into your reading. It's just really that important. You don't want to take this lightly and have this material be the reason you don't pass the exam, because I believe it can make the difference. But so many of these questions become so much easier if you spent some time with that material and kind of viewing things through their lens, because that's how we're going to have to answer the questions. So if you have any questions that you've thought of as I've moved through this material today, you may send them to me directly, michael.long@kaplan.com, or through the instructor link, Ask an Instructor tab on the dashboard online. I hope your studies are going well. You have a lot of folks dedicated at Kaplan to your success with this exam, so please take us up on all the different resources we have for you. So I hope to hear from you, and you know, you've got some other sessions I hope you have time to work through here in the High Five series. So study on, my friends, and I look forward to working some more with you as you head down the trail to the exam. Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye.